Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about rising game budgets. This was a question from Irvin Chadwick 5046 who asked, would you be able to give a breakdown on why video games are so much more expensive to make now as compared to 10 years ago? First off, I can compare it to 10 years ago, 20, 30, 40, and I will. I'm also going to assume that this question has nothing to do with sales price, just to head that off. That's a completely different discussion of why video games cost more now, or even if they do cost more now, adjusted for inflation. But that's a whole different discussion. Not going to talk about sales price here. I'm going to talk about budget. Also, this is a general discussion. Notice all the caveats, because I'm just heading off comments. In general, budgets have gone up. Some games, though, are still done cheap, especially solo games. I can show you a budget of all my games that I used in another video. I'll link it below for the whole video. But this is the budget of all my games since Fallout, because I don't know what the budgets were for Outer Worlds. I'm sorry. I don't know what the budgets were for Grand Bridge or Rags to Riches. I only know what I got paid, which the budget was way higher. But here's all the budgets in millions from Fallout all the way up to Outer Worlds. So this spans 20 years. And you can see that even though there are dips, Temple of Elemental Evil costs less to make than Arcanum or Bloodlines, which came before and after it. And Pillars and Tyranny costs less than Stick of Truth or the Outer Worlds. But there are extraneous reasons for this, and you can see the dotted line, the trend line is always up. So that's just I put that up there as, in my own case, I see this. Game budgets are trending upward. So let's talk about that. Why are budgets bigger now? There's some real obvious answers to this. The first one would be inflation. Everything costs more now. So, of course, budgets have gone up because everything that goes into a game costs more. But let's look at those things, because some of them have gone up more than others. Probably the biggest expense, although I'll mention there's one really big expense that I'm not going to include here that sometimes can be bigger than all these other expenses combined. But I'll talk about it at the end, because it's technically not part of the development budget. But the biggest part of the development budget is probably developer salaries. And those have gone up. And they should have gone up. And all of you should be going, yes, Tim, that's a good thing they went up. Because don't all of you think developers tend to be underpaid? So you should be very happy that their salaries went up. And therefore, you should be willing to pay more for those games. There are other reasons they've gone up. There have been things, by the way, that have contributed to the prices maybe being able to go down a little bit. Like distribution is easier now. But combined with all the things I'm telling you about, the prices still should have gone up. Even if the prices stayed the same, adjusted for inflation, all these other things have gotten more expensive. So in addition to salaries, there's a lot of what I call people expenses that have gone up. That is, for every person you hire, in addition to their salary, a company has to pay a lot of other things. They have to pay insurance for them. They have to pay taxes for them. There are taxes that are shared for employee and employer. I'm talking about the US here. It may be different in other parts of the world. I don't know. So these people expenses have all gone up, which have contributed to game budgets getting higher. I know I had to do that at Troika. I had to look at all those expenses. We completely misjudged for Arcanum some of those expenses, which is why Leonard and Jason and I got half pay for the first year and a half. We literally had no money because we had underestimated how much things were. Another expense that it's hard to figure out in advance is equipment. Now you think, okay, everyone's got a desk and a chair and a computer, right? There's a ton of other things you end up needing. You end up with, there are people who need two machines, programmers who need a build machine or a machine that's hooked up to a dev kit if you're doing PC and console development. There are artists who want a machine to work on and another machine to do their rendering, because rendering often makes their machine run very sluggishly. In addition to that, you sometimes have build machines for a team so that it's periodically just grabbing everything out of source control and making a new build, sometimes multiple times a day. You have render farms where rather than give every artist a second computer, sometimes what we do is we make a render farm where you put your art up there and it handles the rendering for you. What this means though is now you need a whole local network with local servers to handle all this communication in your office, and that has to handle emails as well, and chats and file storage and online stuff like Confluence and Jira. That's a lot more computers, and guess what? Software than you may have planned for. You have to buy a lot of this software, compilers, renderers, things like Photoshop, and a lot of art tools, motion capture tools, sound processing tools, production tools. A lot of these have moved from you buy them to you pay subscriptions for them. Some of them are both. You have to pay money to get them, and then you have to pay a yearly subscription or a monthly subscription or both to keep them going. And let me tell you, a lot more tools are used now than were used 10, 20, 30 years ago. We used to have to make everything. But now, game engines, renderers, compilers, everything's made. Everything is something you just buy. No one would make those things. Well, very few people would make them. Then there's rent. Now, I could have put this under people costs, but you sometimes have rent just because the company itself has to have a physical location. It has to have some place where publishers can visit. It has to have conference rooms. It has to have some place to put these servers. It has to have some place to put just stuff. With rent comes, even with people working from home, you often paying rent on places, and sometimes you have to beyond a year lease, you may have to sign a 2-year or 5-year or 10-year lease, which commits you to a lot of money being spent, which you're going to have to amortize across all the budgets of all the games you're making. And then that office comes with things like utilities and parking and security and like building infrastructure. Every company I've worked at since starting with Interplay, moving on, has had electronic fob keys to get in to prevent literally people just wandering on off the street and going into people's offices asking questions or taking stuff. Yeah, that's happened. And I know some worse things happened at some local companies too, which is why they now lock all their doors and have almost an airlock to get in, where you can walk in and now you're in a locked glass entryway and you have to be recognized and have an appointment before they will let you in. Some fans out there get scary. All of this is expense, costs money. All of this has to be put into the budget for the game. So with all that, there's more. There's other reasons the budget has gone up. Games need more people and take longer to make. Both of those things increase the budget significantly. Now you may go, why does it take more people? You have better tools and more tools. Why does it take longer? Your tools should be better. I will give you 2 different reasons. The first one is, I think, purely art and possibly related to increasing resolutions. There's an expectation among gamers that games will keep looking better and better and better. And I don't just mean along one axis. Gamers expect higher polygon models. That takes longer to make, which means you have to hire more artists if you want to make as many creatures and people with as many animations as previous games. Those higher polygon models need higher resolution textures. Not always. Sometimes you can stretch a lower resolution one, but usually you have higher resolution textures. Those take longer to make. People expect better animation, sometimes mocap animation. They expect facial animation, something we never used to do. And now it's expected. You can't get away without it. Lighting. We didn't used to do lighting. Now, if you didn't do lighting, people would call you out. All of this adds up. All of these are needed and expected and add up. They require additional personnel. Sometimes you may have someone on your team. All they do is lighting. They don't make a single level. They don't make a single piece of art, but they light every level. And you need these people. So that's what I call the art bucket. Then there's another bucket I would call the feature bucket. And the feature bucket can just be said this way. Players now expect more features and better features. Now, I talked about this in the fast travel video, which I'll link below, that people just expect more things. There's features we didn't used to have that now are expected. One of them I mentioned was voiceover. Games didn't used to have it or had it in a very limited way. Then more games added it, and more games added it. And now there are people who literally will not play a game that doesn't have voiceover. And if you don't believe me, go look at my video on why I don't like voiceover and see all the people on there who commented they won't even play a game without voiceover. And there were some people who said they won't play games with voiceover. So there are two camps. Like everything in design, there are two camps. But there are enough people out there that will think of your game as old-fashioned or just won't play it if it doesn't have VO. Now, there are ways of designing your game, so you may not need VO, but you can't do that on every game. Gamers expect more and better UI. They expect it to be smoother. They expect to be able to customize it. They expect tons of options. And tons of options on everything, not just like UI size and location and text resizing, but they may want volume control on multiple axes. I just don't want a master volume control. I want voiceover volume and music volume and sound effects volume. They want input rebinding, not just for accessibility reasons, but they just may want to be able to do it because they feel like it. I don't like the bindings you provided on this controller. I want to be able to rebind everything. And there are players who expect that. Guess what? Some of these features aren't hard to do. They're pretty easy to do. But some of them are hard to do. And I've said UI is just painstakingly time-consuming to do. But there's lots of these features now that everybody expects, and they need to be done. And once they're done, they then have to be tested and maintained. And that's just time. And time is money. That's basically what it boils down to. If you don't believe me, go back and look at games from 10, 20, 30 years ago. You're going to see games with smaller teams and faster development times because they have simpler art and far less features. Now, one last thing. I said there was something that's usually not included in the dev budget, but has been contributing to the overall rise in game costs, and that is marketing. Marketing is more important now than ever to have a discoverability video that I'll link below, but you pretty much have to have marketing now. Well, marketing is now more expensive than ever. It's hard to do marketing because ad prices have gone up, especially because people want to do targeted ads. They don't want to advertise everywhere, and you have to pay for that data, and then you have to make the ad, and then you have to pay to get the ad inserted into streams where people will see it. And so many people out there are good at blocking stuff or paying for premium so they don't see ads, and it's just causing this disconnect between people who want to tell you about something that's coming out and you're going, nope, I don't want to hear about anything. So it's becoming more and more expensive to reach you. There are games out there, and I won't name them, you may know them, whose marketing budgets have exceeded their development budgets. In some cases, far exceeded, like double or triple the development budget. Let that sink in. They spent more on advertising the game than they did on making it. And this is becoming more and more true. So marketing budgets have gone up. It's contributing to the game budgets go up because the more you promise, then the more you have to do. And that's a problem with marketing, often setting expectations too high. And then people don't like the game because it didn't match the marketing. And so the next time you go to make a game, you're like, well, let's try to include those features. Made the budget go up. Anyway, that's all the reasons I could think of why game budgets have been rising steadily over the past several decades. So I hope Irvin Chadwick, 5046, that answered your question.